For over 1,000 years, one civilization didn't just exist, it dominated the known world. It literally shaped the foundations of our own lives today. It's a story that has it all: mythic beginnings, revolutionary ideals, absolute power, and a legacy that is, well, astonishing. We're talking, of course, about the Roman Empire.
So let's just get right into it, because this is the big question, isn't it? How on earth did one small settlement on the Tiber River grow to control 3 continents? How did its laws, its language, and its incredible engineering become the blueprint for basically everything that followed?
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to journey through 5 key eras. We'll kick things off with its legendary founding and the Republic. Then, we'll witness the birth of the empire, hang out in its golden age, navigate the huge crisis that almost tore it all apart, and finally, we'll uncover the legacy that is, believe it or not, all around us today.
Every great story needs a beginning, and let me tell you, Rome's is the stuff of actual legend. But what's really fascinating is that beyond the myth, a radical new political idea was taking shape, one that would set the stage for centuries of conquest. So, the tradition goes that Rome was founded way back in 753 BCE by Romulus. You know the story, nursed by a she-wolf, ends up killing his brother Remus, and becomes the very first king. This whole monarchy thing lasted for centuries, until the last king, a guy they called Tarquin the Proud, was kicked out, and in 509 BCE, the Senate said no more kings, and they created something totally new, the Roman Republic.
And you have to understand, this concept, SPQR, it is so important. It wasn't just some fancy logo they stamped on things. It was their entire philosophy. It was a declaration that power rested with 2 groups, the powerful Senate and the citizens of Rome themselves. This whole idea of shared government, that was the bedrock of the Republic.
Now, the Republic's biggest test, its greatest rival, was the city of Carthage. The Punic Wars were unbelievably brutal, and they forced Rome to build up its military and expand outside of Italy for the first time. Winning was great. It got them Sicily, Spain, and a bunch of other places, but it also created a massive headache. How do you rule a huge, sprawling territory with a government that was only ever designed for a single city?
And that problem of just being too big, it created a massive power vacuum. You see, the Republic's old institutions were literally cracking under the strain, and right into that crack stepped these incredibly ambitious and powerful generals who saw their chance to create a whole new kind of order.
So really, it all came down to this. You had the Senate, which was just too slow and too far away to manage everything effectively. But then you had a general, someone like Julius Caesar, who could act fast and get things done. By conquering Gaul, he didn't just add territory. He proved that true power came from having loyal armies at your back, not from debating in the Senate. He was directly challenging their authority.
So after Caesar gets assassinated by senators thinking they could save the Republic, his adopted son Octavian plays this brilliant long game. First, he hunts down Caesar's killers. Then, he turns on his old ally Mark Antony and his powerful partner, Queen Cleopatra of Egypt, and defeats them. With nobody left to challenge him, he comes back to Rome. But not as a dictator. He comes back as a savior, a restorer of peace. And in 27 BCE, the Senate gives him the title Augustus. And just like that, he becomes the very first Roman emperor. And this right here, this explains Augustus's political genius perfectly. He was so clever. He never officially said, "I have absolute power." He kept the Senate, the consuls, all the traditions of the Republic looked like they were still in place. But in reality, he held all the cards, especially control of the army. It was a monarchy wearing a republic's mask, and boy, did it work.
And this new system kicked off something truly unprecedented. For nearly 200 years, the Mediterranean world saw a period of relative peace and prosperity under Roman rule. It's an era we now call the Pax Romana, which just means the Roman peace.
The first dynasty, the Julio-Claudians, had some, let's say, infamous rulers, like Nero. But after them came the Flavians, and then the Antonine dynasty. And this period, especially under the so-called 5 good emperors, is often seen as the absolute peak of the empire's power and stability, mostly because they figured out how to peacefully hand off power from one leader to the next.
A perfect example of how this all worked is the Emperor Trajan. I mean, think about this. He was born in what's now Spain. He was the first emperor who wasn't even from Italy, which just shows you how integrated the whole empire had become. He was a great ruler, and under his command, he pushed Rome's borders to their absolute limit, all the way from Britain to Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq.
And let's just stop for a second and really appreciate that scale.
At its absolute zenith, the Roman Empire was a tri-continental superpower. It controlled the entire Mediterranean basin, basically wrapping around it like a giant lake, and it brought dozens of different cultures together under one single government.
But, as we all know, no golden age lasts forever. The sheer size of the empire, combined with endless internal power struggles and new threats on its borders, started to put this unbearable strain on the whole system. The cracks were beginning to show.
What came next was just absolute chaos. For 50 years, the empire was being ripped apart by constant civil wars and relentless invasions. But the real poison was economic. Emperor after emperor started messing with the currency, putting less and less silver into the coins so they could pay the soldiers. Well, that triggered insane hyperinflation and a near total breakdown of trade and order. It almost destroyed everything.
The guy who somehow managed to pull the empire back from the brink was Diocletian. He realized the empire was simply too big for one person to handle in a crisis like this. So his solution was radical, the tetrarchy, or a government of four. He literally split the empire into 4 manageable chunks, each with its own ruler. It was a smart, practical fix, but it had a fatal flaw. It fell apart the second he wasn't there to hold it all together.
Out of the chaos that followed, one man rose to the top, Constantine the Great, and the things he did would completely change the course of Western history. First, in 313, he made Christianity legal, a faith that had been brutally persecuted for centuries. Then, he helped unify its core beliefs at the Council of Nicaea. And finally, and this was a huge deal, he moved the entire center of Roman power east, to a new capital city he named Constantinople. So the whole center of gravity had shifted to the east, and the empire itself was about to change forever. But the end of the Western Roman Empire, that wasn't the end of Rome's story, not even close. In fact, you could say its most important contributions were just beginning to echo through history.
The final split came in 395 CE, when Emperor Theodosius divided the empire between his 2 sons. The Western Empire, just worn down by invasions and rotting from the inside, finally collapsed in 476 CE. But the Eastern Empire, with its shiny new capital at Constantinople, it thrived. It became what we now call the Byzantine Empire, and it carried on Roman traditions for another 1,000 years.
So when you ask, what is Rome's greatest legacy? You could make a really strong case that it's the idea of the Pax Romana itself. That internal peace, enforced by legions on the frontiers, created the perfect environment for trade to boom, for ideas to spread, and for these massive building projects to happen all across the known world.
And you can literally still go and see this legacy today. Their engineering was just revolutionary. They gave us mind-blowing amphitheaters like the Colosseum, these incredible aqueducts that carried fresh water for miles into cities. All of it made possible because they basically invented concrete. And they connected the whole thing with over 50,000 miles of paved roads, many of which are still there.
But maybe, just maybe, their greatest gifts are the ones we can't see. Roman law is the direct ancestor of most modern legal systems in the West. Their military organization was the gold standard for centuries, and even their social structures provided a blueprint that would evolve throughout European history.
So, here's the bottom line. We always point to the year 476 CE as the moment the Western Empire fell. But when you really stop and look around, at the languages we speak, the laws we follow, even the layout of our cities, you have to ask yourself, did Rome ever really fall? Or is it still living on, inside of us?